I'm in the 4th year of my PhD with my girlfriend, and she's fallen for the new guy in the lab. Meanwhile, I'm just more focused on my experiments. Because guess what? I've been given a second chance. Even now, I'm counting down the days until graduation. Clara thinks it's because I'm excited about our wedding. Little does she know, it's the thought of joining a classified national project afterward that's keeping me going. And once that happens, she won't be able to find me. Hi everyone, I'm Nick. It's great to meet you, said the new lab guy with a bright smile and an energetic vibe. Not your typical awkward, nerdy engineer look at all. The project is almost complete, and we all understand why our advisor brought him in so late. No one dares to say it out loud, as graduation is so close. Everyone's holding their breath, not wanting to cause trouble that could mess up finishing school. Failing to graduate would be unbearable. But Clara? Oh, when she saw Nick, it was like she lit up from the inside. She tried to keep her cool, but her smile gave her away. Not me, though. I was busy ignoring her little crush moment. I just checked my email silently, almost tearing up at the invitation to a confidential national project. No one knows I've been here before. In my past life, I passed up the chance to join that key project for our wedding. Yet Clara was already looking elsewhere. I did all the dirty and hard work in the lab, pulling all-nighters to analyze data. But as the project leader, Clara wanted to let Nick share the credit and kept asking me to be okay with it. Jackson, you've published multiple papers. You'll definitely get into a research institute. Being third author won't hurt you. But Nick's just starting his PhD and needs a paper for future opportunities. She argued when I hesitated. She got angry, accusing me of being selfish. In the end, with pressure from both Clara and our advisor, I gave in. Our advisor became the first author, Nick second, and Clara third. I, who did the most work, was fourth. The paper caused a sensation, and Nick was hailed as a genius. Clara and our advisor also gained fame and rewards. Me? I suffered from health issues due to the experiments and died in a hospital bed, never seeing that wedding day. Before I died, I learned Clara had grown tired of me and was only interested in Nick's charm. This time, when Clara brought up the same topic, I confronted her. What's Nick got to do with us? He just joined. We hardly know him. She paused, confused. Have you really never met a guy like this before and can't help but be nice to him? I questioned further. Clara, taken aback, raised her voice. Jackson, listen to yourself. What do you think I am? Don't you get Nick's here because of our advisor? She looked at me like I was nuts when I suggested I would talk to our advisor about all this. She seemed like she wanted to say something but held back. Back at the house Clara and I shared, I locked myself in my room. The wedding countdown app on my phone? I deleted it and replaced it with a countdown for the national project. Just 2 more months till I say goodbye to Clara forever. 2 months until a new, challenging chapter begins. This time, I'm done sacrificing my dreams for others. A week later, I approached our advisor, Professor, since the project is almost done, I'd like to be the first author on the paper. She looked at me, barely reacting. Jackson, you're graduating soon, right? Her usual passive-aggressive smile. I used to dread it, but not now. Yes, all the core experiments and data were my work. I want to be first author, I insisted. Graduation's still a way off. You're my best student, Jackson. You don't want anything to mess up your graduation, do you? Oh, I knew the subtext. No, Professor. I don't. She smiled satisfactorily. Good. Just finish this last experiment. Don't worry about the paper. But, Professor, I replied, if I can't be first author and it jeopardizes my graduation, I'll go public with what I know about you and Nick. I knew about their relationship from living this life before. I'd collected evidence, pictures of them on dates at hotels. I was ready to bring her down with me if needed. Her hand trembled as she spoke. Jackson, let's not do anything rash. We can work this out. When I got home, Clara was sitting on the couch going over some project materials. I told her I talked to the mentor and I'm listed as the first author on the paper. Clara's head snapped up at that. She almost blurted out, what about Nick? Seeing my expression, she quickly tried to explain, because, he's connected to the mentor. I looked her straight in the eye. So what? Clara didn't answer but shot back with a question. Really? Did the mentor actually agree to that? What's your secret? Did you bribe the son? What did you tell her? I shrugged. I told her I handled the core experiments and data, so I wanted to be the first author. Clara seemed shocked. And she just agreed to that? Before I could reply, I heard water running from the master bathroom. Someone's here? I asked Clara. She didn't bother hiding it. Yeah, Nick said the dorm showers were gross, so I told him he could use ours. I sneered a bit. Clara was all about being calm, adding, Nick's the youngest in our group. As his senior, we should look out for him, right? Plus, he's got that connection with the mentor. I cut her off. Since he's so special, why not feed him baby formula and change his diapers too? Really honor that connection. She was stunned, mouth moving but nothing coming out. I don't think she expected quiet me, always tucked away in the lab, to say something like that. But hey, in this second chance at life, why should I hold back? Just then, the bathroom door swung open, and out walked Nick, cheeks rosy from the shower. Clara just froze, staring at him. She darted her eyes to me, looking a bit panicked. I was about to ask if her reaction was all because of his mentor connection. But before I could, she found an excuse to dart back to her room. Now Nick, who had been all shy moments ago, was grinning at me like he was saying, see? Your fiancé's not worth much. A little finger wag and she's all over. I ignored him, heading for my room. When someone wants to push your buttons and you don't let them, it throws them off. He wanted to see me mad, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. There it was, Nick's voice, annoyed. Come on, bro, what's the cold shoulder for? Did I do something wrong? I pretended not to hear and just shut the door. Back in my room, I opened the countdown app again. Seeing those numbers getting smaller every day brought me peace. 50-something days to go before my world got quieter. After that, it'd be all about the greater good. For the country, the public, science. The next day, I was in the lab on time. There was just one final experiment left. Finish it, wrap up the project, and I'd be on track for graduation. A fresh start was just around the corner. But with that excitement came some nerves. Last time around, the experiment didn't end well. Back then, when I was injecting the lab mice, one kicked, and carcinogenic stuff splashed on me. The safety gear failed, and in the end, I didn't make it. The sacrifice turned into someone else's win. This time, though, I was smarter. I strapped down each mouse's limbs before injecting, double-checked every seal. Only when secure did I proceed. Injecting the last mouse, I exhaled. This life seemed to be on a better path. But a few days later, when I returned to record data, there was Nick, feeding my test mice random snacks. My vision almost went black. Even knowing the accident last time, I chose not to sedate them. I wanted accuracy, no interference. And yet, Nick trashed all that easily. Snapping back to reality, I stormed over. What the hell? Nick looked all innocent, blinking wide eyes, just thought they needed a snack since they looked pitiful. I almost laughed from frustration. Variable control, ever heard of it? Nick's eyes filled with fake tears. Mice are cute. How could you experiment on them, big brother? He paused, then added, even if you have to experiment, can't their last days be filled with a little happiness? That set off whispers around the lab. I was so mad my hands shook. This is a science lab, not a petting zoo. If you're that soft-hearted, why pick biomed? Why this team? Do you realize I pressed on, a successful experiment here could save lives? Nick made a face. The mice aren't just yours. Why can't I touch them? The lab's everyone's. It's not like you own it. Before I could say anything, Clara piped up, all right, Jackson, he didn't mean it. He's just too kind for his own good. We can redo the experiment. I glanced at Clara, then laughed. So very kind. I turned back to Nick. Surely, with all that kindness, you've never used mice for experiments? Nick wore a proud grin. Of course not. I'm not that cruel. I looked at Nick with his perfectly styled hair and rosy cheeks. Then I glanced at the other folks in the lab with their dark circles under their eyes. Where did that junior's research findings come from? I've seen your master's thesis on CNKI, and it used a mouse model. Nick's face turned pale in an instant, mumbling and unable to speak. The chatter in the lab grew louder. Nick looked desperately at Clara, as if seeking help. Clara frowned, trying to smooth things over. Jackson, the junior only made a mistake out of goodwill. Why bring up the past? Let's focus on the experiments. Everyone makes mistakes, and as a team, suspicion and complaints are detrimental. I gave her a cold stare. Leader, it's easy for you to say focus on the experiments. The experimental model is damaged, and the data now useless. Are you covering the costs and time to redo them, or will the advisor bail you out? Also, is the workload of this experiment shared by the team, or is it just enough for the junior to be kind? Then I turned to Nick. Don't mistake false virtue for kindness. Don't let emotions overshadow science. If you don't get this, stay away from the lab. We're not joking. Every experiment is a fight. With that, I ignored them and left the lab. Clara's footsteps came after me, but I didn't turn back. That evening, Clara tried to make peace by insisting I join her for dinner. She cooked an entire meal, all my favorites. At the table, I ate in silence, not saying a word. Finally, Clara couldn't help herself and broke the silence. You didn't have to mention the thesis today in the lab. I looked up at her briefly but said nothing. She sighed and continued. What others do with their papers isn't our concern. We just need to focus on our projects. Ruining a young kid doesn't help anyone. I let out a small laugh and picked up some food. Funny, you usually care most about him. Clara's expression froze for a moment, but she said nothing, instead placing more food onto my plate. After a long pause, she spoke again. Jackson, you've lost weight, and the dark circles are worsening. Take care of yourself. I stared at the food she'd given me but made no move to eat. She kept talking. Don't forget our wedding plans after graduation. You have to be the handsomest groom. I put down my chopsticks, looked up, and smiled at her. The smile was still there, but inside I was counting down in silence. Clara offered to help me redo the experiment. Before she injected the reagent, I warned her. Protective gear is useless. Tie the mouse down or it might splash, and the consequences will be serious. She paused, surprised, finally realizing the experiment's danger. Her eyes reddened, words on the tip of her tongue, but she said nothing. Once the experiment was nearly done, Clara went to meet with our advisor. I stayed in the lab to clean up and archive the reagents and data. Just then, Nick came in with a bubble tea in hand, smiling sweetly. Senior, I brought you something to drink. Without looking up, I carefully secured the white mice. Noticing my actions, Nick's smile faltered, and his face changed. Annoyed, he muttered. You think I'm a thief? His tone was resentful. You're quite the grudge holder. No wonder Clara talks about you. I finally looked at him, calmly replying. You really don't get lab basics, do you? No wonder the advisor says things about you. Nick's face drained of color, and he bit his lip, remaining silent for a while before finally speaking. How much do you know? I glanced at him indifferently. So this is an admission? Empty-headed indeed. But I ignored him and continued organizing the equipment. After a long day, I couldn't wait to take a hot shower at home. Opening the bathroom door, a familiar scent hit me. I frowned, noticing how Nick's toiletries had taken over the sink. My own sparse items were carelessly thrown in the corner. Seeing this, I chuckled coldly, fetched a box, and packed all of Nick's stuff to the doorstep. Post-shower, feeling a bit lighter, I towel-dried my hair and walked back to my room. As I opened the door, a shadowy figure was standing by my desk, holding my phone. The screen glow cast an uneasy, guilty look on Clara's face. My heart skipped a beat. The countdown app for the classified project. Clara, frozen like a deer caught in headlights, she slowly turned around, her face awkwardly forcing a smile. I was just, your phone rang, so I checked for anything important. Seeing her guilty look, I felt relieved she hadn't found out about the classified project. I quickly walked over, grabbed my phone back, noticing it opened to a messaging app. I smiled and said slowly, Clara, I hope you understand basic respect and boundaries. Her face dropped. Jackson, you've been off, I was just worried. You're still mad about the thing with the underclassman, aren't you? He's got a simple mind like a kid. Why pick fights with him? I mean, everyone else gets along fine except you. I know you feel insecure, but I already said, our wedding will happen as soon as we graduate. I will marry you. I watched her, so serious and righteous, and I just felt like laughing. I was too tired to argue. All right, I get it. Hearing that, Clara's furrowed brow finally relaxed. Okay, get some rest. Good night. Yeah, good night. I just mumbled it without even lifting an eyelid. But Clara seemed not to notice my indifference, happily left the room. After she left, I opened my phone. Watching the countdown app, my restless heart finally calmed. Just a little over a month. It'll be soon. The next morning, while I was brushing my teeth, I noticed the stuff of Nick's, which I had packed up at the door yesterday, was back in place. This time couldn't be bothered to deal with it. After all, they'll be irrelevant soon. No need to make extra moves. You can't wake up someone pretending to sleep, right? For the days that followed, I threw myself into finishing the project. Every day was spent in the lab, collecting and analyzing data accurate to 4 decimal places, repeatedly revising the report until there was nothing to nitpick. Every chart and conclusion was scrutinized countless times. I knew this project was not just a graduation ticket but a springboard for my next phase. Finally, the project paper was finished. At the authorship meeting, I made my demand to be the first author. After the last negotiation, my advisor didn't object, just nodded after a brief silence. As for Nick, his face was pale, but he stayed silent, eyes down on his papers. Only Clara looked incredulous. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but since the advisor had decided, she didn't argue further. After the meeting, Clara hurried after me in the hallway, calling out, "Jackson, wait." I stopped, giving her a cold stare. She frowned, full of doubt. "How did you get the advisor to agree to make you the first author? It doesn't add up. You didn't—" She leaned in, whispered, "Bribed the advisor. Did you?" I couldn't believe I once had feelings for her. Bribery? Clara, do you think everyone invests emotionally like you do? She was taken aback, her face turning pale. Then how did you manage it? I gave a cold smile, squinting slightly. It's thanks to the underclassman. Nick? She was stunned, confused. What does he have to do with this? I didn't bother explaining, turning away with a final line. You'll figure it out someday. At the graduation party, everyone raised their glasses to the end of student life, with hopes for the future. Clara drank too much, her face flushed, and her gaze unfocused. She suddenly lifted her glass, voice slurred and eyes misty. "Jackson, I have to say something. From undergrad till now, I've waited for you all these years. Finally, we're graduating. Soon we can get married." Everything went quiet, all eyes on us. I said nothing, just smiled to myself, not wanting to engage. Nick's expression turned cold, a forced smile now unnatural. He clutched his glass tightly, head slightly bowed, hiding his feelings. Suddenly, a fellow female student spoke up. "Clara, if you love Jackson so much, why are you so close to Nick? With all the attention you give him, it's a wonder everyone's eyes aren't sore." She'd had a few drinks, face slightly flushed. Her words were like a bomb, riling up everyone at the table. She honed in on Clara. "Jackson's skills are top-notch in our department. He's like a god to everyone. And you? You don't appreciate him, always looking elsewhere. What's really in your heart? If you can't appreciate him, leave the chance for someone who can." The room fell silent. Clara's face visibly changed, slamming her hand onto the table. "What nonsense! How am I not appreciative? You just can't stand me being happy. My business with Jackson is none of your concern. You, eyeing up someone else's fiancé, aren't you?" She stood unsteadily but used the alcohol to fuel her confrontation, voice rising. The female student merely smirked. "I'm just speaking the truth." Clara lost it. Her hand shook, the wine glass crashing to the floor, smashing into pieces. Chaos ensued. Some tried to mediate, others to clean up. But Clara only grew more agitated until Nick stepped in to calm her. Clara, just let it go. No point in dealing with those who can't see others happy. She finally calmed down a bit. But the graduation party had already turned into a farce, ending in an unhappy scene. Doesn't matter, I'm leaving tomorrow anyway. By the time I got home, it was late, and I couldn't sleep. After all, a lifetime's worth of grudges tangled over 2 lifetimes was to be left behind tomorrow. Thoughts surged like a tide, recalling the people and things from both lives, all the choices, struggles, and compromises. In my past life, I seemed to chase belonging and promises, thinking my life had to have a woman, a marriage. But now I no longer ponder these. Why must there be a woman in my life? Why must there be a marriage? Society always tells us how important it is to get married, like it's a rite of passage for everyone. It's as if that's the ultimate achievement for a person. Without marriage and a family, they make you feel incomplete, like your value is missing. Growing up, we were taught to live for others, for a partner, for kids, even for society's approval. But after all these years, I've realized it's all just conditioning, a chain society puts on individuals. Marriage and partners can be my choices, but they shouldn't be where I end up. They shouldn't be the center of my life or define my existence. I once put marriage on a pedestal without even realizing it and pushed myself too low. Now, I finally understand what I should do, what I really want. Why waste my life on the mundane aspects of marriage when I could be doing something truly meaningful? Research is my real passion, a career worth dedicating my life to. I know now I have no regrets for the rest of my life. In the early hours of the morning, I left. Clara was in deep sleep, completely unaware. Good. Clara, may we never see each other again. The 3-year National Confidential Experimental Project has officially begun. The project is extremely challenging, with tight schedules and heavy tasks. It's almost non-stop work from morning till night, experiment design, data analysis, technical issues one after another. Even with the pressure, I feel surprisingly firm and fulfilled inside. I know that once this project succeeds, it will be a groundbreaking achievement that will save thousands and thousands of lives. Every time I see the experimental data aligning closer to expectations, the exhaustion is temporarily forgotten. Instead, an unparalleled sense of satisfaction takes over. Honestly, I'm a bit surprised at myself. In these 3 years, I rarely thought about Clara, Nick, or the past. I guess I'm more open-minded than I thought. Looks like focusing on the research I'm passionate about is my true salvation in life. 3 years flew by. At the project commendation ceremony, I gave a speech as a representative of outstanding contribution. 3 years ago, we chose this tough path, every step filled with uncertainty. But today we are here, proving that countless failures weren't in vain. Every drop of sweat, every night of persistence, has led us to this moment. This isn't just our victory. It's a victory for every life and family that will benefit from this achievement. There was thunderous applause, and many had tears in their eyes. Through the excitement, I saw a burning gaze piercing through the crowd, landing directly on me. It was Clara. In just 3 years, she seemed to have aged a lot, her eyes more tired than before. But I didn't linger. I just looked away and continued my speech. After the event ended, Clara found me, her eyes red, seemingly trying hard to suppress some emotion. "Jackson," she started, but I spoke first with a smile. "I heard from the seniors as soon as I left the base that you married Nick." The words Clara had been about to say got stuck, a look of panic in her eyes. "Jackson, I can explain. Please hear me out." I chuckled. "You should go home and explain to Nick." Before I even finished speaking, I gave a small nod, and the security personnel stepped forward to escort Clara out. She was momentarily stunned, her face turning pale. Her eyes got even redder, and her breathing became erratic. She looked at me, with a complex gaze filled with resentment, regret, and even a hint of pleading. "Jackson." I didn't acknowledge it. I simply turned and walked out of the hall. While packing my things at home, I found my old phone. When I turned it on, a flood of messages came in. Over 1,000 of them were from Clara. Most were long, drawn-out texts. I glanced at them. They were mostly asking where I was, saying she missed me, She waited for me. She had nothing to do with Nick. With a smirk, I blocked her. I was in such a rush when I left 3 years ago. I forgot to block her. After all, I don't have time to linger. The next project is waiting for me to join. From now on, I live for the people and the country. Extra Clara. Jackson was always a really good person. The junior at the breakup party was right. From undergrad to PhD, he was always the top student. Everyone's ideal guy. He was always quiet, yet so impressive and humble. Calm, intelligent, highly educated. He was exactly what I imagined my partner should be. That night, after evening study, I gathered all my courage to confess to him. Never thought he'd say yes. I was so happy I laughed out loud, wanting to announce to the world that Jackson was my boyfriend. When did I start feeling he was too bland? Maybe a few years into our relationship. And it became clear when Nick showed up. Young, charming, lively. So different from Jackson. Jackson wasn't wrong. It was the first time I met someone bright and passionate. After all, this type of person is rare in our field. My heart wandered, though I didn't want to admit it. I kept telling myself, it was because Nick was connected to our mentor, because he was part of the team, because he was the youngest in the group. So I had a duty to look after him, to be good to him. But the more time I spent with him, the more Jackson seemed dull and too composed. Yet, when I confessed to him in undergrad, he was like that. When I proposed during my PhD, still the same. In the end, I was the one who changed. Later, Jackson left. Left me and our wedding. When I couldn't reach him, I almost lost it. Even if he was bothered by Nick, why wouldn't he hear an explanation and just disappear without a word? I used all my connections to find him, even went to his house. But he seemed to have disappeared into thin air. No matter what, I couldn't find him. Later on, I even went to the dean and begged her for help. The dean seemed a bit speechless. Jackson is a living person, yet he vanished without a trace. We're all into research, don't you understand? Aren't you his fiancée? Didn't he tell you anything? I was stunned. As slow as I am, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah, Jackson was always a rare talent in the research world. With his abilities, it's normal for him to be recruited by the government. That's when I realized clearly that Jackson really didn't want me anymore. After Jackson left, I drowned myself in alcohol every day. I kept brainwashing myself, Jackson will come back. Postponing the wedding didn't seem like a big deal. That's when Nick slipped into my life. I was really mad, wanting to cut ties with him. I told him I'd wait for Jackson to come back, no matter how long it took. But Nick told me he was sick. If I didn't care, he'd go public with our relationship at the institute. I had no choice but to compromise. Later on, I realized more deeply that Nick was all show but filled with schemes inside. He couldn't even match up to one of Jackson's fingers. Yet I lost Jackson because of this empty shell. I was such an idiot. Later, Nick's relationship with his mentor was exposed. I reported it. People online called Nick an academic temptress. I should have noticed earlier. With Nick's empty schemes, where did his research achievements even come from? They were just the result of his appearance and manipulative tactics, stealing other people's research work. Even Jackson hinted at it more than once. But back then, I was blinded and ignored it. I just felt that since Nick showed up, Jackson became a bit different, no longer as reserved. Instead, he often said unexpected things. If only I had paid a little attention, I might have noticed Jackson was planning to leave during that time. But my mind wasn't on him then. Later, I couldn't take the mental torment anymore and chose to leave that world. I know my life might stay like this. I'll spend my entire life cherishing the memory of the person I lost.